nothing, nada, cero, condones violence in this form. Nada. Yeah.
Is it true that violence is never the answer? Well, in rhetoricians' terms, no. The problem with a phrase like violence is never the answer is that it is a value statement. It's a moral position that comes from an individual's values. In this case, it's the value of believing in nonviolence, maybe like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. The issue with taking a moral stance in an argument is that you end up appealing to like-minded people who share the same values as you, rather than people who are different from you. And guess what? Those different people are the people you actually need to persuade. But nonviolence is a good thing, you say, and violence is sort of frowned upon, you say. It is, but this is simply not a universal truth. Not everyone agrees that violence is never the answer. Most countries in the world have armies. There are wars going on all the time. The US spends over $700 billion on the military every year, so according to them, hell yeah, violence and the threat of violence is the answer. And what about a situation where you need to inflict harm on someone else in order to defend yourself? What about back in the day, if you're someone like Malcolm X and you know you're walking around with a target on your back, but you don't know exactly from where? The FBI? The nation? The Klan? Shouldn't you preemptively take action and make a move to defend yourself? What about in a black neighborhood the cops don't care about, which if it's not widespread now, would have definitely been widespread in Malcolm X's time? Don't people need arms to defend themselves? What about in international politics, when you're a little power next to a big power and you know the big power has interests in your country and it's only a matter of time before they invade, and when they invade you know you're done for. So shouldn't you take action now and get the first strike in while they're less prepared and more open? Because if you don't, you're dead. Not to go on and on with these scenarios, but the bottom line is that nonviolence is a moral value that one practices. And if your audience doesn't have that same moral value, they're not going to agree with you. And the conversation will end as soon as you take that moral stance. And if you lead with that stance, then you killed the argument before it even started. So what if you want to convince someone that Will Smith was out of line when he slapped Chris Rock? If you lead with violence is never the answer, you're not appealing to the crowd of people who believe he was just in defending Jada, or the crowd who believes Chris Rock got his just desserts. Personally, I think Will Smith was out of line, but I can also envision myself punching someone in the face if they insult me or a family member bad enough. If you lead with violence is never the answer, you're appealing only to people who will support you and listen to you anyways because they're already on your side, morally. That, or you'll just bore your audience and make them think you're kind of basic. Sometimes we feel good after saying something because we get a round of applause, but many times this is because our audience is an echo chamber, which means all we've done is reaffirm rather than persuade. In order to be considered persuasive, you gotta appeal to values that are different than yours, sometimes even opposite of yours. So let's say you're a nonviolence type and you want to persuade pro-violence or pro-sometimes violence people into agreeing with your position. You don't want to lead with your moral value of nonviolence. Instead, lead with an analogy. By the way, I make videos on anything language, persuasion, or words related, and I got more stuff coming on everything from Victorian ladies to 2 Chainz, so please lick that like button and punch subscribe in the face. Imagine you're in an assembly in school and another student goes up to speak. I don't know, maybe give a speech or read a poem. And in their speech or poem, they say something that you perceive as a diss to you and you get mad. You get up from the gymnasium floor and walk past your row and up to the stage and down to the podium where the speaker is, and you strike the speaker. You hit him in the face and walk back down the stage into the gymnasium floor and back to your row and take your seat once again. Do you think you'll be allowed to just sit there as though you didn't just hit the guy? What will happen if you made it to your seat before being intercepted by a teacher is you will get ejected from the assembly and sent down to the principal's office, where the principal will promptly suspend or even expel your ass. You will be punished immediately for your actions in a very harsh and unforgiving way because you did a violent action on a speaker whose job it is to speak to the whole school. And you interrupted him with your violence and made a mockery of what a public assembly is supposed to stand for, which you know your high and mighty principle full of ideals like whatever is the principle equivalent of live, love, laugh. You know your principles got that, so your punishment will be even greater than if you just hit a kid during a disagreement at recess. And yet Will Smith received no punishment and went on to be pampered by his peers and even promptly made a speech about love and the importance of love and even got a standing ovation for that. Do you think that kid in the school assembly would get to give a speech afterwards in that same room and same assembly and receive a standing ovation? If Will Smith can get away with violence like that in a grown-up ass assembly at the Oscars, then kids should be allowed to slap each other in school assemblies too. You know, this kind of logic is true since the point of practicing civility in school is so that we can practice civility in the adult world. Obviously, you and I can both agree that we shouldn't let kids slap speakers in school assemblies. So come on, you gotta admit it makes sense. Will Smith shouldn't have been violent at the Oscars. The reason the analogy works better than the value statement is because the analogy is something your audience can relate to, while the value statement is not. It's safe to say everyone has been in school. They all know what it's like at a school assembly. They know what the rules and expectations are. They can feel themselves there as you paint the scene in your analogy. But they can't feel anything when you take your moral stance and say violence is never the answer. Interestingly, if we flip the scenario around, like make it a pro-violence or pro-sometimes violence person trying to persuade a non-violence person, we may use the exact same analogy, but in a different frame. We may say, yeah, if this was back in school, Will Smith would have gotten suspended and removed from the assembly, but he didn't in this case. And is that really because the Academy Awards is so whack and so spineless? It could instead be that the awards organizers and the crowd didn't see the violence as completely unjustified. I mean, the joke was kind of a low blow. I bet if Chris Rock made a more lighthearted joke and got a slap from Will Smith, then Will Smith would have been escorted out of there. But the lack of action on the part of the Academy shows, at least subconsciously, that there was some level of justice, if not 100% proper justice, then at least some justice in Will Smith's slap. In both cases, the analogy appeals to the shared values we all went through in the school system where bad behavior was punished with suspensions and expulsions. It's something we all went through and saw or experienced in school, so we can all relate to it. We all likely have values that come from there. Now, you could respond to that scenario flip by saying, really, are you going to hold the Academy Awards and all the eliteness and pomp that comes with them? Are you really going to hold all that as the standard for what is just? Which would kind of be my personal counter-argument to the Will Smith sympathizers, but that's not really the point here. The point is to get an actual back-and-forth conversation going with some hope of agreement or compromise or reconciliation or new understanding, etc. at the end, and we are now on that path thanks to the analogy. Plus, if we follow that counter-argument, then we've allowed the slap discussion to take us on the path to figuring out what is the standard of justice and correct conduct in our society. Like, what cultural force should we respect the most? And that is an enlightening discussion that might help us better understand the culture we live in. Another higher aim of the study of rhetoric. And it's all thanks to the analogy that both sides of the debate can relate to. To wrap things up here, I know there are a ton of different takes on the Will Smith slap. Some of them are about the roles of comedians. Some of them are about how we need more awareness of alopecia. Some are about how it's not about alopecia. And some even say if we criticize Will Smith and how violent he was, we are being racist to black people in general. Personally, I don't care what take you take. Take any take, it's all good. I don't even care if you're a moral man's to the death. As long as you hide your moral with an analogy, Playmaker Nate out.